Most cars fade quietly. They rust out, get traded in, or vanish into scrapyards once their warranty era ends. The Mercedes 300D did the opposite. The older it became, the more visible it was. Decades after production ended, it still appeared daily in places where cars are not pampered but punished. Airport queues, border crossings, sun-baked city streets, and unending stop-and-go traffic. This was not a sports car or a halo model. It was slow, heavy, and unremarkable on paper. Yet across Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, the same pattern emerged. When everything else broke, the 300D kept going. Taxi fleets adopted it, not out of nostalgia or brand loyalty, but out of necessity. Miss a day of work and income disappears. Reliability is not a feature in that world, it is survival. Mileage figures that would end the life of most vehicles barely registered here. 500,000 miles was common. 1 million miles was not shocking. These cars were repaired endlessly, reused relentlessly, and trusted completely. Newer vehicles came and went, but the old diesels stayed. That contradiction is the heart of this story. How did a luxury sedan become an industrial tool? How did a car designed for comfort earn a reputation for immortality? And why, decades later, are so many still working while their replacements are long gone? The answers are not found in advertisements or spec sheets. They are hidden in an engineering mindset that no longer exists, and in a machine that quietly refused to leave the road for generations worldwide. The Mercedes 300D was born in an era when Mercedes-Benz engineers were not chasing efficiency targets or quarterly cost savings. They were chasing longevity. Internal design priorities focused on safety margins, durability, and mechanical tolerance, even if that meant extra weight, slower acceleration, or higher production costs. The goal was not to impress on a test drive, but to survive decades of use without complaint. The diesel engine choice reflected that philosophy perfectly. Diesel was not selected for excitement or performance. It was chosen because it ran cooler, produced usable torque at low speeds, and tolerated abuse better than most gasoline engines. Components were intentionally understressed. Parts were thicker than necessary. Systems were simplified wherever possible, not to save money, but to reduce failure points. At the same time, much of the automotive industry was beginning to shift in the opposite direction. Lighter materials, tighter tolerances, and faster development cycles promised better efficiency and lower costs. Cars became more disposable, designed around ownership cycles rather than lifespans. Mercedes resisted that trend. Engineers were given room to overbuild without worrying about what a repair might cost 20 years later. Emission systems were minimal, electronics were rare. Mechanical solutions were preferred because they could be serviced anywhere by anyone with basic tools. The 300D was not an accident. It was the result of deliberate decisions made by people who believed a car should outlast its owner. What Mercedes could not predict was how that belief would collide with the real world, and how it would turn a luxury sedan into a global workhorse. The Mercedes 300D was never intended to rule taxi ranks, but the real world had other plans. As these cars aged, they began migrating into service, where comfort mattered less than survival. Across Europe, operators discovered that the same qualities that made the 300D feel overbuilt also made it unstoppable under constant use. Taxi duty is merciless. Engines idle for hours, transmissions shift endlessly, and suspensions absorb punishment without rest. Fuel quality varies wildly. Maintenance is often delayed. In these conditions, most cars reveal their weaknesses quickly. The 300D did not. It absorbed abuse and kept working. day after day, year after year. Word spread fast. Fleet owners noticed that downtime dropped. Mechanics learned the car's systems once and rarely needed to relearn them. Parts were available, repairs were predictable, and failures were rare. Soon, the 300D appeared far beyond its original markets, operating in scorching deserts, crowded megacities, and rural roads that barely qualified as pavement. What mattered was not speed or status, but trust. Taxi drivers depend on their cars the way pilots depend on aircraft. When a vehicle fails, income stops. The 300D earned loyalty by starting every morning, running all day, and asking for little in return. Even as newer models arrived promising better efficiency and modern features, many drivers refused to switch. The old diesels were known quantities. They had already proven themselves under pressure. In a profession where reliability determines survival, the 300D was not just a good choice, it became the default. And once that reputation took hold, it was nearly impossible to replace. Newer alternatives looked impressive on paper, but paper meant nothing on broken roads and endless shifts. Experience mattered more than promises, and experience consistently pointed back to the same car, waiting patiently at the curb every single day worldwide. Extreme mileage was not a rumour with the Mercedes 300D, it was routine. Cars quietly passed 500,000 miles, then kept going. Some crossed the million-mile mark without rebuilds, not because they were lucky, but because the car was designed to make wear boring instead of dramatic. The reasons were mechanical, not mystical. The diesel engine was tuned gently, producing modest power from large, slow-moving components. Internal stresses stayed low. Heat was controlled. Fuel systems were simple and tolerant, able to handle poor-quality diesel that would destroy more delicate designs. Nothing was pushed to its limit, which meant nothing failed suddenly. Materials mattered more than numbers. Thick castings, conservative tolerances, and heavy-duty internals allowed parts to wear slowly rather than break. When something did wear out, it could usually be repaired instead of replaced. Service access was straightforward. Components were built to be removed, rebuilt, and returned to work. On paper, the 300D looked unimpressive. Acceleration was slow. Horsepower figures were forgettable. But those metrics only describe how a car feels when it is new. They say nothing about how it behaves after 20 years of daily use. Over decades, what mattered was not speed, but consistency. The 300D was engineered to age gracefully. Each mile did not bring it closer to failure, but deeper into familiarity. Drivers learned its rhythms. Mechanics trusted its limits. Mileage became a statistic, not a warning. By this point, the mystery begins to clear. Longevity was not accidental, it was engineered. The more uncomfortable question is why such an approach disappeared, even after proving it could outlast everything that followed for generations worldwide. Progress did come for Mercedes, but it arrived with compromises. As regulations tightened and markets changed, newer diesel models followed a different philosophy. Engines became lighter and more complex. Electronics multiplied. Emission systems grew sensitive. On paper, everything improved: efficiency, refinement, performance, and compliance. In practice, something vital was lost. Taxi fleets noticed almost immediately. The newer cars demanded cleaner fuel and stricter maintenance. Downtime increased. Repairs became more expensive and less predictable. Systems that once tolerated abuse now failed under it. A single sensor or emissions component could sideline a car for days, sometimes weeks. For drivers whose income depended on uninterrupted operation, that risk was unacceptable. The most telling detail was not that the replacements struggled, but that the old 300Ds did not disappear. They continued operating alongside their successors, often outlasting them. Fleet owners delayed replacements. Drivers refused upgrades. Cars that should have been obsolete remained the safest choice. This was not because newer engineering was flawed. It was because it was optimized for a different world, one with cleaner fuel, shorter ownership cycles, and controlled environments. The 300D had been built for uncertainty. It expected neglect, variation, and abuse, and it survived because of it. What looked like progress from a distance felt like fragility up close. The industry had moved forward, but in doing so, it stepped away from the extreme durability that once defined Mercedes. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. A car designed decades earlier was still working reliably, while its replacements cycled out of service. That reality forced an uncomfortable question. If newer did not mean better for the people who depended on these cars most, what exactly had been improved, and what had been quietly sacrificed along the way? What ultimately kept the Mercedes 300D alive was not engineering alone, but human trust. Drivers did not just rely on it mechanically, they relied on it emotionally. The car behaved the same way every day. It started when expected, warmed up predictably, and responded without surprises. In a job defined by long hours and thin margins, that consistency mattered more than comfort or speed. The 300D was forgiving in ways newer cars were not. Missed maintenance rarely caused immediate consequences. Poor fuel did not trigger warning lights or shutdowns. Rough driving did not cascade into system failures. When problems did appear, they arrived slowly and predictably, giving owners time to adapt instead of forcing sudden downtime. That predictability created confidence. Over years of daily use, confidence turned into attachment. Mechanics trusted the car's limits because they had seen them tested repeatedly. Drivers knew exactly how far they could push it. Owners understood its costs, its weaknesses, and its strengths. Replacing it felt less like an upgrade and more like a gamble. In taxi work, uncertainty is the enemy. Newer vehicles promised improvements, but promises are not the same as proof. The 300D had already proven itself under the worst conditions imaginable. It had survived neglect, abuse, extreme climates, and endless mileage. That history carried more weight than any specification sheet. By this point, the car stopped being just transportation. It became a benchmark. Other vehicles were measured against it and often found lacking. The 300D represented a level of trust that could only be earned over decades, not launched with marketing. That is why taxis never truly let it die. Not because they resisted change, but because change had not yet offered something more valuable than certainty. Today, the Mercedes 300D still appears in places where it should not exist anymore. Not as a classic, not as a collector's item, but as a working machine. Its survival is not nostalgia. It is evidence of an engineering mindset that once treated durability as a primary goal, not a side effect. That mindset valued restraint over optimization. Engineers assumed cars would be used hard, maintained poorly, and kept far longer than expected. So they built margins into everything. Time, not performance, was the metric that mattered. When the industry moved toward efficiency, complexity, and rapid turnover, that philosophy faded. What was gained was progress. Cleaner emissions, better fuel economy, and improved safety reshaped the modern car. What was lost was something harder to measure: trust earned slowly through endurance. The 300D reminds us that longevity is not accidental. It is designed, tested, and chosen. This is why the car refuses to disappear. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. It did what it promised for as long as necessary. In answering why these cars are still running, the explanation is simple. They were built to last, in a world that no longer waits for anything else.